Okay, wonderful. And as people join, again, just want to say welcome to you. Thank you so much for being here with us and for joining again, Great Lakes Urban for today's episode of Bright Spots in ABCD. This is this session, and it's not a part of our normal cycle, but it's a special one to me. I was just sharing with Karen, who's going to be speaking with us, sharing with us today. But in 2013, I returned to school to get my master's degree in community development. One of the articles I had to read early on was about Edmonton, Canada, and how special to be coming and having conversation, going deep into this important story. Well, my name is Eric Smith. I'm the executive director of Great Lakes Urban. Great Lakes Urban exists to connect people in community and through that to build strong, safe, healthy neighborhoods in which all people can thrive and attain their highest potential. And we're happy to have you. We host these as a way to share promising practices, best practices, and insights from thought leaders in the asset-based community development or ABCD community. As we go through this webinar today, I do want to note just a couple of details, a couple of items. If you hover over your screen, you'll see here toward the bottom, there's a box that says Q&A. So if we have questions, if today's presentation with Karen brings up questions, please drop those in there in that Q&A section, and then we'll pick those up. At the end of the presentation, we'll have about 50 minutes or so of conversation with Karen about those questions. So please make use of that. The other thing I'd just like to note early on in these conversations is I'll be saying ABCD, or Karen might be saying ABCD fairly often. And that stands again for asset-based community development. ABCD is it's a methodology, a process, a set of principles and practices that we incorporate here at Great Lakes Urban as our key toolkit for working with neighborhoods and communities and leaders. And it's an inside-out methodology. It's relationally focused. It's place-centered. It's radically inclusive in its approach. And so those are all reasons why we just think it's a really important toolkit. So ABCD stands for Asset-Based Community Development. With that, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Karen Wilk. Thank you so much for being with us. Karen, this is important, has over 2 decades worth of experience, both as an ABCD practitioner as well as a thought leader in this space, and has worked all across North America and is based in Edmonton, Canada. But it's more than just like theory and working with other. She's also situated in a neighborhood as a resident of Laurier Heights neighborhood, and she's the past president of her neighborhood community league, and really looking forward to hearing more about that. And with her time in Edmonton, that's really built out this neighborhood connector role with Abundant Community Edmonton. And with that neighborhood connector role, supporting the work of the community league system, which is a 100-year-old innovation that's brought hyper-local governance to Edmonton neighborhoods. So just again, Karen, what a pleasure and a joy to bring you here and to invite you here to share your story and the story of Edmonton to our audience. With that, I will turn things over to you, Karen. Maybe you could start us off by first sharing a little bit more about yourself.
Well, delighted to be here. Thanks so much. I love sharing the stories of my own journey in this and that of Edmonton, which, as Eric already said, is a very unique place in that we have had this history for over 100 years of developing and nurturing those kinds of community connections and care that Eric highlighted. And we've lived here now for about 30 years. For those who don't know, Edmonton is about a 7-hour drive north of the Montana border. And so we might get a little bit more winter than you do, which is why I like to have my picture of Edmonton behind me in summer in view, even though we've had snow already. So I'm going to share some slides. We're going to start with the Edmonton Federation of Community League's journey and move into looking at what that looks like in a particular neighborhood, my neighborhood, since that's the easiest one for me to talk about, and how the ACE, Abundant Community Edmonton, also became an integral part and has had a significant influence in our city. Get the slides going here. So the Edmonton Community League Federation began, oh, slides aren't changing. There we go. Already in 1921, 9 leagues, which are little neighborhood volunteer associations, were beginning to vie for the attention of the city, trying to get on the agenda, get support, get funds, and so on for their grassroots movement to make a difference in their communities. They wanted land allocated for recreational facilities, and they wanted grants to engage people in their neighborhood in all kinds of different ways. And since then, we've come a long way. We now have 162 plus community leagues. I say plus because more and more of our newer neighborhoods are coming on board with that. It takes a bit of time to do that. But already back in the early 60s, the city was recognized as being unique in this way, and that the city is funding public parkland, providing facilities, financial assistance to these autonomous neighborhood organizations and depending on them. So there was an incredible amount of trust on local citizens right on their blocks on the part of the city. Actually quite extraordinary, I would say. The city didn't come in to do things for or to, but to work alongside and to support the ideas and innovations of the very neighbors in the community. So today, the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues is a very developed and well-established organization. And I have a little 2-minute video here, which I'm going to share with you, that tells you a little bit more about it better than I can in 2 minutes. So that hopefully gives you a bit of an introduction, and I'm sure you remember everything that was said in that video. It goes very quickly with a lot of information. So we'll slow down and talk a little bit more about many of the things that were noted in it. Just a quick overview that today there's more than $500 million spent and invested by the community leagues with the city investment. And we have what's called a tripartite agreement. And the three parts are the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues, the City of Edmonton, that's the COE there, and each individual community league. And together, those three work to make all of these things happen. And the video mentioned a number of those. I highlighted the ice rinks on this screen because the ice rinks are not just for skating. When there isn't ice on them, they often have basketball, hoops, pickleball. That's the biggest thing around right now, actually. And kids also use them, and adults for that matter, for rollerblading and roller skating and numerous activities. Actually, even dog training happens on the ice rinks. As at the federation level, things are coordinated and support and programs initiated that all of the individual community leagues can then access. And here's a few examples. They help us with anti-racism, Indigenous projects. We have a TP initiative where the TP comes to your hall for a month, and once a week we gather and learn things from Indigenous members of our community and experience and recognize the significance of our First Nations. There's a walking group, an LGBTQ2S+ project, and helping us become green and more environmentally friendly. And recently we had a big birthday party for the 100 years. Unfortunately, it ended up during COVID, so some of that got kiboshed into a very different format. So the Federation is all about encouraging new initiatives, diversity, programming, and volunteers in each and every neighborhood. And just of interest and note, we've had almost 300,000 hours of volunteer time donated, committed to leagues in 2022, which sounds like a lot to me. Maybe you have more in your neighborhood. So just to kind of bring it down to a local level, in my neighborhood, Laurier Heights, the leadership is made up of teams with these kinds of headings. So for example, under events, we would have 5 or 6 people. Our facilities team has 7 or 8, and they look after basically everything. Our facilities team has work days, they do the grounds, they got a grant to put in solar panels on our roof. We're now saving a lot of money and contributing to the city grid. We built a new hall. The right side of this building is our old 1956 structure that was updated and then an addition put on it. We look after parks. We got money to put in the spray park. And another aspect is the programs team, which was mentioned in the video as well. Helps all of our age groups participate in numerous ways: tennis, soccer, pickleball. And then we have the events team, which brings neighbors together in lots of different ways. This was a spring fling party, supporting a bike race, participating in the Moose Hide campaign, having summer kickoffs with just food trucks and musicians and a way for neighbors to connect and hang out. Harvest beer garden in the fall with lots of fun, sharing produce, having a produce competition. We actually had a 75-pound pumpkin win that one this year. Kids and all ages engaging in lots of different ways. And it's all about creating that community of care and connection where we begin by knowing one another and working towards that asset-based community development, which is fostered in all kinds of different ways. And we've discovered that one of the grounding principles for making it happen in our context is creating spaces for people to meet one another and develop those relationships. And in the Abundant Community Initiative, it's often called practicing hospitality. And that extends beyond fun events to it, together engaging in things that are important to us. So recently, our mayor also recognized this, that how the leagues are playing a major role in being a community voice on city issues and events, and on keeping families active, healthy, and engaged. Oh, wow, that's funny. So that's kind of the bigger picture of the Federation and its work with the city and how the city supports it. And you can kind of just see a little bit of breakdown of who's responsible for what. And more recently, about 10 years ago, the city was approached by a number of us as neighborhood volunteer leaders with the idea of Abundant Community. And the mayor agreed to a pilot project that for 6 months would invest us in what's now become known as Abundant Community Edmonton. And it's based on this book by John McKnight and Peter Block, which I would recommend. And in that book, they recognize the significance of neighbor to neighbor, block to block connections. And they give some pretty significant ideas. And my colleague and I, Howard Lawrence, felt like we wanted to figure out how to make this happen in our neighborhood, to actually put legs on the ideas in the book in a very practical way. And that's how what's now called ACE was begun. We experimented in one neighborhood, and within 6 months, we had 50 block connectors. And the city was so impressed with that and the impact that it had on that neighborhood that they agreed to support us in introducing it in 8 neighborhoods. And now most communities have or are in the process of developing this initiative. So at the center of it is the neighborhood block connector, who coaches, facilitates, initiates the recruitment and participation of block connectors. The block connector is a person on the block, which I'll talk about a little bit more, or an apartment building or in a condo unit, whatever that neighborhood might look like. And they connect with and are a part of the neighborhood leadership. That's the community league. So they are leading up that team in the context of the board that I showed you before. And then they have alongside them a few people who support with, for example, social media and that piece, communications, and behind the scenes kind of efforts to make sure that the initiative is moving forward. So our description of a block connector is that they are the point person, the party person, and the listener on their block. And by the way, we have a lot of fun as block connectors, as some of these pictures will show you. And the idea is that as block connectors, we want to help people move from being strangers to acquaintances into relationships. And as those of you who are familiar with asset-based community development know, there's 3 elements of that. Hospitality, we've talked about a little bit already, of discovering the gifts of others and making space for those to be developed and shared, and bringing them together with the shared interests, needs, passions, goals, etc., of those who are in our communities. And it usually just starts with a simple invitation and a focus on, as I said before, that hospitality. So having regular, whether it's a little tea party or a more involved block party, with all of our neighbors invited and included, bringing together different ethnic groups, ages, in all kinds of different activities, from street hockey to a barbecue or potluck to a St. Patrick's Day dinner, to creating connection via backyard barbecues, And it's really all about getting people together for food and fun and breaking down the misconceptions that create this sense of fear or insecurity in our communities. Yak and Snack became a really popular event in our neighborhood. So the block connectors' other role is to initiate these conversations. They're the listeners. And we have a card related to that. The block connector would give the left side of this to their neighbor, introduce themselves, and then have a little conversation with them. This might happen at some of the social events, the block parties and so on, or it might be at another time over a cup of coffee, even at the door on the deck, front porch. And they try and discern from that person what they and their household's vision for the neighborhood, what they're interested in, and what they might be able to contribute to the community. And this communication card also is important because it addresses the need for a sense of safety and security in our neighborhoods. So with the permission of the neighbor, little neighborhood block emergency contact lists are created. And sometimes the block connector just holds that info, but most of the time, neighbors are willing to share that with each other. And it's incredibly surprising how often it is accessed, whether it's, oh, my dog got out, has anyone seen it? To somebody contacting a neighbor saying you left your garage door open, whatever it might be. Can somebody keep an eye on my house, pick up the mail while we're away? So block connectors, after having these listening conversations with neighbors, get together and also do the next piece, the association of all of what we've learned about our neighbors' interests. Oh, I've got 3 neighbors on my block who like gardening, who are interested in a cooking club, a book club. So we discuss the vision that they've been communicated, and that's often shared with the community league, leadership in particular, what the interests are, and the skills, abilities, and experiences of our neighbors. And through these conversations, we bring those things together and bring those people together. And that's how the Pickle Club, Ball Club developed. We have a seniors art group that get together Monday and Thursdays afternoon and paint and learn about painting. And they're actually getting really good. We have a Nordic walking group, and the seniors residence in our neighborhood, which houses about 250 people. Together, we decided that there's lots of people in our community that like playing board games. Why don't we do that at the seniors' home and invite those neighbors to participate as well? This group is really popular. WWW, it's code name for Women in Wine on Wednesdays. Not every Wednesday, just once a month. We discovered that there's 37 people in our immediate vicinity who are into gardening. So now we have a Talking Gardens group. Play groups, all kinds of different things, all initiated through putting into practice the ABCD components and elements that create and nurture a vibrant and abundant neighborhood. You can see how so many people of all different backgrounds have been getting together. And the third element of that card is about sharing our gifts for the sake of others and our experiences. So this was a fundraiser for MS, Multiple Sclerosis Society, initiated by one of the neighbors. And it was all about making ice sculptures. You might not be able to do this where you are, but we have enough snow and ice to create incredible winter landscapes, as we call them. There is also a great deal of interest in the Truth and Reconciliation movement in Canada, which is all about addressing First Nations and our Indigenous peoples in healthy ways, learning about that initiative. And that happens on September 30th. It's Aware Orange Day. And again, there were neighbors who wanted to make that happen. And that desire to care for others also takes place on a very personal level. a dear neighbor who was a block connector got a terminal cancer, a very rare one, and she died at 39. But in her 6-year battle, many neighbors came alongside, and we had fundraisers and so on to try and support her and her family. Garage sales, a cookie walk. This year, our goal is to get 250 cookies and raise even more money. Many people in our neighborhood are interested in walking. So with the city's funding, we created a community walking map, which has maps of the whole neighborhood with little stories around good walks and the famous tree and the snake nest and so on that neighbors have found in there. One of our bigger projects that many neighbors were concerned about is the vacant lot at the entry to Laurier Heights. And it took quite a few years to get this going, but numerous neighbors were willing to support and get involved in it. And that vacant lot that I saw where not good behaviors took place began to be repurposed and recreated. It's leased land. We lease it from a large oil and gas company. And we paid for the first 5 years ourselves, my husband and I. They're charging us $1 a year, so we're really big spenders. But again, this project just brought so many different neighbors out of all ages working together, creating a space that we could all enjoy. And probably the most significant part about this project was a family who owned a construction company decided they'd like to donate a gazebo park, a gazebo, and they got their staff to construct and put this in place. And in the process of this project, unfortunately, he was diagnosed with lung cancer and died before the project was completed. And now, almost 10 years later, that gazebo has never had any vandalism. And I think it's because this is a treasured, owned story that belongs to the community. Even newcomers, new neighbors, young neighbors hear the story and respect it and protect it, clean up the garbage. They also really enjoy it. And it's now named our gazebo park. The last project I want to tell you about that's come out of our asset-based community development initiatives with the support and engagement of the city and the Federation of Community Leagues is what we call a sustainable food forest. So instead of putting in a community garden, we decided we wanted to do a 7-layer forest. And forests have existed for thousands, no, more than that, hundreds of thousands of years on our planet as self-sustaining initiatives. And this one has the developing layers of bottom, green onions and asparagus and strawberries right through to the top level, which is apple and plum and pear trees. And it's all open to the neighborhood. It's all looked after by the neighborhood. People walk by and pick raspberries, young and old. We have Weeding Wednesdays and other days we come together to work on the project, add to it. We have a pollinator garden where all ages are learning about the importance of pollinators for the security of our whole planet. And it's a perennial garden that we're contributing to, that we believe is not only self-sustaining and restorative and regenerative, it's deliciously edible, and it's been a wonderful way for neighbors to connect and be part of a significant project and have lots of fun. So Laurier is one neighborhood in Edmonton that is very proud and excited about being a part of the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues and the Abundant Community Initiative. And hopefully some of those stories inspire and encourage you. I think we're going to take some time for some questions now. I'll just leave you with a few things to think about besides your questions. I have some questions for you. How could your community leverage this? Develop a neighborhood leadership model such as our community leagues, and an Abundant Community Edmonton model where you get block connectors on every block connecting and serving as the point person, party person, and listener for their neighbors. What might a partnership look like in your city or town, and where would you start? And what might you do differently, having learned about some of these initiatives? Finally, what might be your first next step?
Wow, thank you for those questions, Karen, and thank you for those stories. Powerful. I caught myself choking up thinking about the park and the history behind that. Others were commenting marvelous stories. Thank you. We do have some questions coming in. Folks, do again feel free to drop those in the Q&A section. Also, I just want to note, just so you have those to go back to, we did put the Abundant Community Edmonton, which is ACE that was referred to, Abundant Community Edmonton link, so you can see what they're doing there. And we'll also drop in for the Federation as well. And I wonder, just to kick it off, can you share a little bit about, so each community league is its own nonprofit with volunteer board members from the neighborhood. The Federation, I assume, is also an independent nonprofit organization. Is that true? And then the city has Abundant Community Edmonton, which has staff, which is Lawrence and others that are there in service of or to support the neighborhood efforts. Is that, do I have the three tripartite issues?
Yes, you do. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. Good. And so Jay asks, what's the exchange, the stated exchange between the city and the neighborhoods?
So a little bit more about how that kind of works. The Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues often is the direct connection for bigger issues and concerns, some of those ones that I had on a few of the slides. And it gathers a rep from every league quarterly to talk about those things and what other projects and programs we want to be involved in together, what grants we think the city should be providing, and so on. And then at the neighborhood level, so the community league, the neighborhood connector, and so on, have what's called a neighborhood resource coordinator, who is a full-time staff person with the city of Edmonton. And they serve as a liaison, a support. They help us navigate the city system, which isn't always easy, I'll have to confess. And we can contact and work with them on all kinds of different projects. So they would be our direct link in terms of how to get grant money, for example, for our food forest, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you mentioned money, and that's one of the questions that came up, was wondering about. So you mentioned that some support, there's like each league has some support from the city. And so can you say what kind of like what that breaks down to? Say more about the budgets and how much that is, and how else they fill their budget needs?
Right. So the city support, other than staff, is via grant. So you have to apply, for example, for a grant to renovate your hall kitchen or to upgrade your hockey rink or whatever it might be. And the community league itself actually does a huge amount of fundraising. Many have an annual membership. So it's like, in our case, it's $40 for a household for the year. Some communities, the membership is free. It's a way for also collecting contact info with community members. and just creating a little bit of a base. I would think pretty well all community leagues also get a casino. We're in a cycle of casinos where, for 48 hours we have to staff a casino, and that's a big one. Community leagues usually make about $80,000 that way. And so that's quite significant in helping us run our programs. And then often the businesses in the neighborhood will make donations to the community league. Private citizens will support their neighborhood with donations. Some obviously are more able or get more material resources that way than some of our under-resourced neighborhoods. And in those cases, the city grants an awful lot more support and funding for making things happen.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And first of all, I just want to say too from the chat, Evangelina says the stories are so beautiful and touching. Cannot wait to have similar revival restoration stories from our community. That's really great. But then we also just wanted some people wanted a little more context. How big is Edmonton? Maybe even talk about a community league, that neighborhood. Maybe talk about size, context, demographic information.
Right, for sure. So Edmonton has a wide diversity, as most cities, in terms of what neighborhoods look like and what they consist of. The city is at about 1.15 million right now. Expectation will be 1.25 pretty quickly. And the neighborhoods in places where there's a lot of apartment buildings are obviously significantly more people. In most cases, there are probably between 1,000 and 2,000 households. My neighborhood has about 1,200 households, and mixed housing in most communities around here, and a growing number of what we call infills, where lots are sold and then duplexes or four household buildings are being put in. So they're trying to increase the density significantly in the communities.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and let's see. Then there's a question going back to there's multiple questions about the funding. Is the funding formula driven for connecting and shared activities versus administration?
Yes. So very much the bottom line is on practically all the grant forms is how is this going to connect neighbors? How is it going to engage, be inclusive, and so on. So that's a high priority. And because it's the neighborhood, at the neighborhood level, it's all volunteer, there's very little administration costs. Now, in the context of how the city functions and so on, there's a lot more obviously happening about that, but I can't really speak to that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's well, and people are wondering what's the level of funding for neighborhood leagues? What's the annual grant? How much is that from the city?
Yeah, the grant, it's via your applications. Basically, you have to apply for what you need each year, and there's different categories. Some are very particularly directed towards an event, so you could get a certain amount of money to run a harvest fair, for example, and others, I think I mentioned, are more for infrastructure, the hockey rink repair, putting in tennis courts, whatever the neighborhood feels they're desiring, and facilities upgrades and so on as well. So it's very as needed base, I guess you could say, as you apply.
Oh, that's great. And so I guess the expectation is you're starting with the block connectors, the neighborhood connector, the listening, seeing what people want, building the budget around that, and then you submit that to the city, is what I'm hearing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So
Wonderful.
the community league creates that budget and applies for grants based on that.
Okay. All right. Um, it's a new question just came in the chat here. So are parks generally managed and cared for by the neighborhood leagues, the community leagues, or is it a city or the city parks? Is there a city parks entity that's doing that?
There is city parks as well, so that is part of the tripartite agreement. So around in each community league, uh, the care of the pieces of it are actually mapped out. So our soccer fields and all the soccer fields in the city are mowed by city staff, parks people. The immediate area around the hall, we look after the gardens and walkways and so on. So it's shared work, I guess you could say. At one point, the city was cutting the grass on all our little green spaces at once a week. They've cut that budget significantly. So now we will have neighbors, if they have a green strip, for example, in the center of their road, they will go out and take care of that because the city isn't doing it anymore.
Mhm. Yeah, just it's really interesting, right? I mean, I don't know if this shared arrangement between citizens acting through these leagues and the federation in the city. It's grown up, it seems like, over a long history, like you say, 100 years. Um, and it's just a fascinating story. Megan then comes in and asks, how do you help neighbors see the value of being a part of the community league or volunteering in the neighborhood? What can be done to help generate this in neighborhoods where the culture is keeping to yourself? So you've got this 100-year history and that's supporting all this in some cultural context. What about another neighborhood that doesn't have that same context? And how do you inspire people to join?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a challenge. I think being intentional and neighbor to neighbor, block by block. So really starting at the personal level of saying, hey, we don't need to be afraid of each other. I'm knocking on the door and saying, hey, I'm your neighbor. I live just over there. Establishes immediately, we have something in common. We live here. We care about this place. We're together, have ownership and responsibility for it. How can we make it a better place for all of us to live? And kind of creating a little bit more imagination around what it might be like to have a good neighborhood, a place where we do feel safe and secure, that if there was an emergency, there'd be somebody there for us. And for me, it's actually the people amongst whom we do life, because uh, we have no extended family nearby. I think many people are in that situation. There's more and more people coming from all different places, either as immigrants or refugees, and they feel very alone and disconnected, and often come from places where there was a deep sense of community. I think we have to really break down some of the stigma, the stranger danger type thing. Your neighbors are not strangers; they're your neighbors. So changing the narrative, um, and starting with saying yes when you meet a neighbor and introduce yourself, and somebody says, "Hey, we should get together sometime," make it happen.
Yeah, so maybe I don't know if you can be willing to dig a little bit deeper into that, because since you're at the kind of like part of the group that got the neighborhood connector model started with Abundant Community in Edmonton. So getting neighbors involved, you say a first strategy is get a connector right at the block level. So, hey, I'm just down the road. Um, so can you say more about uh, the role of the neighborhood connector in getting block connectors involved? Because I know in a lot of neighborhoods that I work with, even that's a challenge, right? Getting the block connector there,
Yeah.
which is why we're centering a lot of our work on that neighborhood connector role and how important that is. I don't know if you can share a little bit more about the neighborhood connector and how they support block connectors come into the story.
Sure. Yes. Uh, no, nothing profound actually. Going down a street and seeing a few people out and saying, "Hey, I'm the new neighborhood connector around here. Who's the person on the block that knows everybody?" Or who's the person on the block who's lived here a long time? They're often the natural connector. And if you're talking with somebody who's out and about in the neighborhood, they usually can say, "Oh, that's Joe. He lives right over there. He knows everybody. He's been here forever." And that's who you go, that's the door you go and knock on first. And you'll probably find somebody who's already being a block connector in most locations. We talk about making sure the block connector does a friendly knock, the as opposed to the solicitor or campaigner or something who's more like just little things that and immediately when you come to the door saying, "Hey, I'm your neighbor," and that just brings down the wall instantly. I'm not here to get money from you or to tell you that you should be a part of my whatever it might be. Um, and then with that block connector, many neighborhood connectors would kind of walk alongside, knocking on other doors, setting up a block party or a street get together. Sometimes it's just putting a coffee pot on the sidewalk. And as neighbors walk by on Saturday morning for their little jaunt or dog walk, being there present, introducing yourself, creating spaces. We call it right where you live on the block, and then in there's sort of four spheres: your place, your block, where people meet in the neighborhood. So at the park, at the school waiting for kids to come home, on the soccer field, and then in activities that are happening in the neighborhood, the safety committee or the federation and so on.
Yeah, can I ask, so with each community league, is there, when you build the request, the budget request that goes to the federation, that goes to the city, but when you're building that budget out for each league, does some of that go toward the neighborhood connector role, or is it strictly or is everything volunteer, and then that goes toward, I don't know, materials and supplies and things needed for the projects?
Yeah, good question. So when we started after the one neighborhood pilot project, when we went to 8 neighborhoods, we actually had funding that also came from the province, your state in your case, and for $15,000, which supported a part-time paid role for a neighborhood connector, and also could be allocated towards creating kind of a software program, communications, kind of the administrative piece behind helping this work in your community if that was needed. That has not existed for a number of years now. However, people can apply, or neighborhoods can apply for some funding for that kind of a role to get going. Most neighborhood connectors who've been in it for a while, like myself, are totally volunteer though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and so just following up on that, Hardy asks, can you say more about the relationship between the existing leagues and the Abundant Community Initiative?
Right. So, I mean, the Abundant Community obviously was a later development. And if you remember kind of that graphic of all the roles on a typical community league board, the new role is the neighborhood connector on that little graphic. And so if when a neighborhood begins to engage in the ACE, that person becomes a board member, maybe perhaps initially not as a full voting elected kind of person, because it's a very particular kind of role, but definitely there and advising and sharing the stories and updating and involving the community league in that. So that, in our case, we call her our lead connector, and I'm trying to train up and get other people involved in my neighborhood. She comes to every board meeting, talks about what's going on. The block connectors meet regularly as if they were a team for the community league, in the same way as facilities team does, and programs team and events team and so on. So they're very much a part of it. Now, having said that, I will also admit that in some community leagues, where there's a little more struggle to have an effective board, there's a bit of pushback to having somebody else, a new role, get involved. You can imagine some dynamics are not always healthy in the way we want them to be in every neighborhood.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, no, I would be curious. Sometimes we come away with these conversations and we don't address the fact that there are challenges, right? In every context and every neighborhood. So I do want to ask that. But first, Mark is kind of coming back to and asking about, again, coming back to that funding. So what are the main ways, maybe tell a couple of different ways the leagues are raising funds in addition to the support they get from the city?
So leagues have all kinds of different little projects and events. We've done usually kind of fun, buy a ticket to hear a band, and we'll have a beer garden or a wine tasting or board games, whatever, some kind of fun activity, and we'll charge for that, and that will be fundraising. Some neighborhoods would also do things like a bike-a-thon and get people to sponsor the kids to bike around their neighborhood and raise funds that way. Kind of your basic grassroots fundraising activities. I know a neighborhood has one, they call it the Run Raiser, and it's basically kids running across the field, and their parents and their grandparents sponsor them, and they raise lots of money. Yeah.
And it sounds like it's probably that's an engaging activity as well.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So it serves multiple purposes. The joy of fundraising, right? Yeah. And then Evangelina asked, can you speak more about the membership and what is there a fee involved of becoming a member? What does the membership include?
So the membership is set in terms of if you're having a fee for it by every neighborhood on their own. There's no set amount. Some charge nothing, but membership, you get a little card, you get tags for your running shoes or your skates for using the facilities around the city in community leagues. And it's a way for us to collect the contact info as well, beyond the block connector piece. And that all goes into a database that the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues also has. And via that, you get discounts, for example, at the city's swimming pool, Fort Edmonton, which is a historical interactive park. Some local stores, restaurants, etc., give a 10% discount if you show your community league card. So it's supported and integrated. The selling point for me, though, is not all those benefits. It's trying to encourage people to recognize that you are part of this community and you are responsible for this neighborhood as a citizen in this place. This is us. So be a part of it. And that narrative in some places is strong, and in others it's not. People want the concrete benefits of 10% off for an ice cream. I don't know if that helps, but that's a general. In our community, we charge $40 per household. If you can't afford it, then we have a contingency plan, so to speak, for that. And then we have associate memberships, which is inviting businesses and churches and other organizations in a community to also become members of the neighborhood that they're situated in. And then there's different rates for seniors and singles and so on as well.
I know, that's great. Well, I imagine some people join because of the membership or the benefits, but then they realize that, hey, I'm getting so much out of this. Just life is just better when we do it together, right? So that's great. And then we're coming up on our time, but so I want to get to Debbie asks about law enforcement. How are they involved, or the police and fire, emergency services?
So actually, that's a longer story probably. But one of the things we've discovered, kind of researching the impact of asset-based community development, block connectors, and so on in neighborhoods, is there's a decrease in calls to 911. There's a decrease in use of food banks, ambulance calls, all that sort of thing. And neighbors are, the police force is recognizing that neighbors knowing each other is more important to safety and security in a community than many, many other things, because we're all watching out. If somebody sees a non-neighbor suspicious person, for lack of a better way of saying it, then they let everyone else know right away. Occasionally we have seniors who are in the extended care dementia part of our residents in the neighborhood, who somehow end up wandering around the streets and they have no idea where they are. Well, a neighbor will stop and walk them back to the residence and get them there. If we see a stray dog or anything else going on, it's immediately goes through the chain of texting or messaging or on the Facebook page, whatever. Really positive impact, in other words, in this way.
Great, thank you. In maybe 30 seconds, you could answer Mark's question. There's a lot of variability between the different leagues, or does it look pretty similar? For example, do most manage their own hockey rink and soccer fields, community center, or some of these shared among different leagues, several leagues, or how's variability?
So yes to all of that. So in some back-to-back neighborhoods, in our case, for example, one community has the tennis courts, one has a curling rink, one has actually we have beach volleyball in a nearby neighborhood. So we don't all have the same things. And if you have your little tag on your shoe or your skate, then you can use all those in the whole city, actually, for free.
Well, folks, we're coming up on our time. I hate that. I always end these conversations with, there was so much more to explore. But I know that you will join me in thanking Karen for coming to be with us, sharing from her experience, both in her neighborhood across the continent, really. I do want to note there is, the work of Great Lakes Urban is about, right, helping communities establish systems that support neighborhood to become strong, places that are strong and healthy and strong and safe. You can support the work for us to help us spread this kind of a methodology to new places, this kind of a system. So we're going to drop our link in the chat for Great Lakes Urban, but if you go to greatlakesurban.org, there is a donate button. But that's what we're here for, is to help to spread these kinds of spread awareness about your community can have this kind of impact on its citizens as well, and you might be the one to get it started. So thank you so much, Karen. Thank you to everyone that joined us. Thank you for the questions, and we'll be back in about a month to visit with Mark Cornelis and some others at Michigan at the City of Holland, with their Flourishing Neighborhood Initiative. So thank you. Keep an eye out for that invitation to come and join us. And again, everyone have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Great to be with you.
All right, very good. And Karen, I think you will need to be the one to close us out since you are the host right now. So if you do end for all, or make me host first, maybe.
You want me the host? Okay.
Yep. And then I'll end it for all of us. And
Right. Thanks. That was really fun.
yeah, really appreciate it, Karen. I'm glad we got to this.
Yeah, me too. Okay. Make host. There we go. I figured it out. Thank you. Well, I think you're doing great work. All the best to you.
Yeah.
Forward to continuing to get the connections and hear the stories. Yeah. All right.